So, welcome to Chapter 7 on cognition. So, this is one of those chapters that I think is probably one of the key ones in the whole semester, as we finally are out of the physical development descriptions that we've had through from chapters 3 through 6. And now we're going to look at cognitive development for the next three chapters. And so, we're going to really be delving into how thinking changes over time. So when we're talking about cognition, we're really looking at the activity of knowing and the process which knowledge is acquired and problems are solved. And so it really goes to the core of us being able to effectively problem solve along the way. So we're going to have, I believe, 5 modules in this particular chapter. And the first one here is going to be on a kind of an overview of cognitive development and a reintroduction of Piaget. Now, Piaget should sound fairly familiar to you because we went over him in Chapter 2. And if you remember in Chapter 2, I was saying that that was the most important chapter because we were going to get a preview of some of the other theorists, and Piaget was one of those. And of course, we're going to go say Piaget now. And so let's go ahead and launch into that. So the man on the right, not surprisingly, is Piaget. And he had a couple of views of human activity, in particular children and adolescents in their development. And that was that they were active agents. Now, remember, one of the main dimensions of debate in regards to child development was passive versus active learning. And Piaget was firmly in the active learning camp. And so, other words, children are actively involved. They're out there. They're trying to figure out this world, and the observing things, investigating, experimenting, which is why I'm going ahead and including that lower left photo there, where you have children getting into the refrigerator and all of the wonders that there are to behold in that wonderful little cold box where it has food and all sorts of things. And there's a reason that you see latches on refrigerators in families that have young children, because they can make quite a mess. I remember there was a commercial not too long ago, showed a child getting out some orange juice from the refrigerator and then trying to pour a glass of orange juice, but of course succeeding in pouring about 3/4 of the whole contents on the floor and then getting a little bit into the juice glass and triumphantly taking the juice glass and leaving the mess, of course, for their parents. So quite amusing. And that goes into the active agency that Piaget is talking about. Now, Piaget said part of all this and how we make sense of the world is through the use of something that are called schemes or schemas. And so this is a very important concept that we're going to be going and delving into in the next couple of slides. But first off is just, what is a schema? And schemas, according to Piaget, are cognitive structures. They're organized patterns of action and thought that we construct to organize and interpret our experiences. So let me give you an example of a schema. One of those would be of chair. Okay, when I say chair, you're going to have a certain image that just kind of pops into your head. And that's going to be of something that has 4 legs, a back, and a seat. Now, of course, we'll talk about there are many types of chairs, and the one I just described to you is not necessarily going to cover every single instance of things that we classify as chair. And that's the brilliance of schemes. In schemes, we take in new information and we look to see, does that meet something that we already know? If it is, we label that new thing a chair also. If, on the other hand, it's something that doesn't really fit in the chair, maybe we need to fit a new sort of description of what that is. So not a chair, maybe a table. Okay, so we go through our life forming more and more new schemas and then combining them and organizing them. And that is how cognitive development occurs. But let's get into the specifics of what Piaget was really talking about as far as how these kind of cognitive development, the advancement of schemas progresses. Okay, so this is how we do it. We have 2 inborn intellectual functions. The first of which is organizations, where we can combine those existing schemas into more complex ones. And so we have chair, which is a pretty basic schema. And then we also have this term called restaurants. And restaurants are a collection of schemas, basic schemas. So think to yourself, what sort of things do we count on when we say the term restaurants? Well, one of them obviously is chairs, but we also have tables, we have food, we have ordering menus, usually have servers, and all of these go into, all these basic schemas have been combined into restaurants. And so whether I go to the Taco Bell here on the bypass or I go to the rallies, I'm going to classify them all under restaurants because they all have these common schema characteristics, okay, of basic things. Of course, one of the most important things with restaurants is the bathrooms. I like to call McDonald's my unofficial rest stop when I get on the highways because sometimes you just don't have the normal rest stops, but you can always count on a bathroom being in a McDonald's or any restaurant for that matter, and you count on those. Okay, so this is our way, organization. That's what we're born with and one of the advances in cognitive development. The other inborn skill that we have is the issue of adaptation. And the adaptation is the process of adjusting to the demands of the environment. And so, in other words, we want to make sure that the way that we're organizing things in the environment matches what we have up here so that we can get in that environment very easily. Okay, so this matches with here. And we do that through adaptation when we are introduced to new objects that we need to develop schemas for. So the first one is assimilation. Okay, so I'm using existing schemas in trying to take that new information and put it into them. So let's say we have a chair, and then if you look at our common desks, a lot of times in the Kamek building, if you've been in there, they have what we would still consider chairs, but maybe they only have two legs, but they're kind of bent at an angle. We still assimilate that into our existing schema for chair. Just like when we see a new restaurant, if you travel much, you're going to run into different restaurants, and you don't have to have seen them before because you know the characteristics and you say, okay, this kind of lumped in. So most of the time we default to try to assimilate to something that we already knew, an existing schema. But there are times that we run into something that's just totally new, and we may try initially to assimilate that information, but then what happens to it is that we get corrected from the environment, usually in the form of our parents or somebody else saying, no, that doesn't fit there. That's such and such. So now we got to form a new schema. We got to accommodate that new information and create something totally new that now fits the outside world that we have just experienced that in. So assimilation, accommodation, very important processes. So remember when I was talking about this kind of idea of this our head and this our reality and the two need to mesh? Well, that constant process going back and forth is called equilibration. Equilibration. Okay? It's the process of achieving mental stability where our internal thoughts are consistent with the evidence in the external world. When we run up against stuff that doesn't fit here from here, we have what we call cognitive disequilibrium, and that spurs growth. And so, if you look at your liberal arts education that you have here at EKU, one of the things that you have to consider is, why do I have to take a general education curriculum? Well, one of the reasons is to create cognitive disequilibrium, introduce you to things that you've not been exposed to before, because it's that challenge, it's that constant shifting back and forth between cognitive equilibrium, where this matches this, and cognitive disequilibrium, where the two don't match. And that constant pull is what spurs on our intellectual development. Okay, so here's an example on this next slide of a state of equilibrium going into disequilibrium and then back again using the processes we talked about. So you see, cat. Cat is a small furry animal with a fluffy tail. Okay, they meow, smell nice. Now comes this new thing. It's a small creature, fluffy tail, but it doesn't meow and it certainly doesn't smell nice. So I've tried to put that fluffy creature into and assimilate into my new old schema of cat. That doesn't fit at all. So now I've got to accommodate into something new, which my mom called a skunk. And now I'm back to equilibrium. Okay, so that's how this process works, and that's why schemas are so important. Now, what we're going to do in the next few modules is go through Piaget's stages of cognitive development and the particulars in each of those stages. Now, one of the things that's good to know about these stages is they occur along what they call an invariant sequence. Remember, we talked about continuous development and stage development. Well, Piaget is definitely a stage development, and it occurs along invariant. In other words, you can't go from one stage and skip to the next third stage. You got to do 1, 2, 3, 4, not 1, 4, 3, 1. Okay. So with that little preface, we'll go ahead and get ready to launch into Module 2 and talk about the sensory motor stage.